In Littleton, Colorado, a suburb of Denver with roughly 40,000 people, one of Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold's favorite games was Doom. In fact, Eric Harris, a Kansas-born military brat, modded the game and created custom levels in his spare time, sharing them on a private blog in which he also spilled about his violent fantasies and mischievous and increasingly cruel misdemeanor prank missions with Klebold and others. He, Dylan, and a wide circle of their friends were into computers, gaming, and the internet. Some of those friends wore long, black, and dramatic trench coats that earned them the moniker Trenchcoat Mafia. But Klebold and Harris weren't true members of the informal group. The pair had met in middle school, but kindled a close relationship at Columbine High. In addition to working at a local pizza chain, the boys kept journals filled with violent plans to commit terrorist attacks, showcasing racism and homophobia, as well as severe mental illness. Later analysis by the FBI would deem Harris, an A student who once faked a suicide to a girl who had dumped him, as a psychopath, and Klebold, a slacker student whose pacifist Ohio State alum parents named him after the poet Dylan Thomas, was labeled depressed. They learned how to craft pipe bombs and, like most of the people in the area, collected and shot guns. Harris's father once found one of his son's pipe bombs and brushed the incident off. At the state-of-the-art Columbine High School, home to 1,945 students, the duo created 5 skits, one that included them as hired hitmen going around shooting bullies. Their friends from the Trenchcoat Mafia had starring roles. The boys also shot videotapes in their basements and in the wilderness, detailing their violence, revealing their racism, and making clear their instability. When Eric fell out with their friend, Brooks Brown, he began crafting threats on his blog and specifically named Brown. According to Brooks, Dylan shared the web address with him so he could have a look. So Brooks Brown's parents found out about the threats, and they report Eric Harris to the police. The police never file a drafted affidavit for a search warrant on Harris's home. So at this point, Eric stops posting alarming content to the website. In December 1997, Dylan writes a poem about being a bullet in a gun. On January 30th, 1998, the pair were arrested for stealing computer equipment from a van, earning them a slap on the wrist thanks to Eric's father's connections. On November 2nd, 1998, an 18-year-old friend named Robyn Anderson, who'd later be Dylan's prom date, bought the boys weapons, including 2 shotguns, in a private sale at a gun show. 2 boys named Mart and Phillip Duran sold them a Tech-9. In late February, early March 1999, Dylan submitted a short story about a 6'4" left-handed man in a trench coat going on a shooting spree. Dylan himself was 6'4" and left-handed. His teacher was alarmed and informed his parents, but nothing happened. Eric turned 18 on April 9th. 9 days later, Dylan went to prom while Eric had a date. According to friends, they made plans for post-graduation and everything seemed fine. Well, apart from Eric being rejected from the Marines on April 15th because he was on Luvox, an antidepressant. On the morning of April 20th, the pair filmed a final basement tape, apologizing to their parents and the people they loved. By 11:15, they had placed 2 kerosene bombs hidden in duffel bags in Columbine's cafeteria and parked their bomb-strapped cars in the student parking lot. Harris had ran into Brooks Brown, who he had made up with some months ago, and Brooks asked Eric why he wasn't in class earlier. Eric said, "I like you now. Get out of here." Feeling nervous, Brooks left. Meanwhile, Harris and Klebold realized something was wrong. A diversionary bomb they had placed in a nearby meadow had gone off just fine. But 488 people were in the cafeteria for the first lunch period at 11:15 a.m., and those bombs hadn't detonated yet. So they threw a pipe bomb in the parking lot, and those nearby assumed it to be a senior prank. But then the boys started shooting by 11:19 a.m. The first fatality was a 17-year-old girl named Rachel Scott. Injuring several others, the pair's next victim as they ran into the school and down a hallway was a sophomore named Daniel Rohrbough. They proceeded into the cafeteria but didn't shoot anyone, though there were multiple people inside. They went back to the entrance and shot at assembled officers by 11:26 a.m. Inside the cafeteria, science teacher Dave Sanders, along with 2 janitors, evacuated students to the second floor and urged people in the library to stay where they were. As Dave Sanders tried to secure the area, he was shot twice and managed to make it to a science room with 31 people inside. At 11:29 a.m., Klebold and Harris then went upstairs to the school library, where 56 people were hidden inside, including 2 teachers and 2 librarians. Harris announced everybody with a white hat, aka a jock, was dead. Several students then hid their hats. The pair then murdered 12 people in the library and injured 10 within a span of 7 minutes. Dylan spotted a friend named John Savage, whom he allowed to flee. One victim, the only black boy in the room, a football player and senior named Isaiah Shoels, was singled out with epithets before being killed. One of the injured was a boy named Patrick Ireland, who had passed out after being shot 3 times, including twice in the head. Eric and Dylan left the library to wander around the school, firing shots, throwing pipe bombs and Molotovs, but most of the school had already been evacuated. Those who remained were hidden in the school's myriad enclosed hallways, classrooms, and closets. SWAT surrounded the school by 12 p.m. At 2:15, the students and teacher who were providing medical care to Dave Sanders put a sign in the window saying bleeding to death, which was broadcast live. The police prevented medics to getting to Sanders as they swept the 250,000 square foot school to find the shooters, who they weren't sure were dead yet. Meanwhile, Patrick Ireland dragged himself, despite being paralyzed, to the window of the library, where at 2:38 p.m. on live television, he was seen being rescued. Dylan and Eric's bodies were found in the library at approximately 3:30 p.m. 188 total shots had been fired by the boys, most by Harris, who did nearly double more than Klebold. 15 people, including the murderers, were dead, though newspapers initially reported up to 25 had died. The Columbine massacre was not the first incidence of school violence, nor would it be the last, but it was the most premeditated and deadly school attack in the modern era, made worse by the fact that the perpetrators were not 1 but 2 teenage boys who then ended their lives afterward. Also, this is missing from a lot of people's recollections about Columbine. They also left 95 bombs around the crime scene, which weren't discovered in total for days after the event, and not told to the public until February 2000. That's one of the major misconceptions about Columbine. It wasn't just a school shooting, but a terrorist attack. Schools in the area remained closed as police investigated if there was a broader conspiracy. Per the Washington Post on April 23rd, other area schools reopened today with tightened security, and trench coats like the ones worn by the 2 gunmen were banned in Denver and 2 other Colorado school districts because they could be used to hide weapons. The night before the massacre, Mark Maines bought the boys 100 rounds of ammo at Kmart for $100. He and Phillip Duran would get 9 years and 4.5 years respectively for their role in selling the underage killers a gun, which was illegal. Their friend Robyn Anderson, meanwhile, got off scot-free because of the gun show loophole, which didn't require background checks for guns bought in private sales at gun shows. The loophole was closed by state law in Colorado and Oregon in November 2000. The police withheld information about the previous search warrant affidavit that was drafted but never filed, and were roundly criticized when this became knowledge. Dylan's mother, Sue, insisted that her son would have never participated in the massacre for 6 months afterwards, until she was shown the basement tapes. Speaking of those tapes, Time magazine reported on them before victims' families had been notified about them. All of the boys' behavior in the preceding months and years were analyzed and heavily broadcast, and a clear pattern of danger, corruption, negligence, and influences emerged. Multiple former friends volunteered to offer stories about the boys to the press, from a mixed girl insisting that the Nazi-obsessed pair weren't racist, to a girl telling New York Times Eric was her best friend while telling Inside Edition she wasn't really close with them. The victims' families were in a heavy daze of grief and invasive coverage, and arguments over memorials raged when a group put up 15 memorial markers, including for Dylan and Eric. Daniel Rohrbaugh's father tore them down. Isaiah Shoels' family complained that they had long brought up troubling racism to school staff, which hadn't been addressed. Here's a 1999 interview featuring Isaiah's father being told about his son's final moments.
And Isaiah did kind of look, he was a buff little kid, and he looked like a jock. He was well built. And they walked by and they saw Isaiah. And one of them said to the other one, they said there's a N-word over here. And the other kid came over and saw him, and Isaiah tried to back up. Isaiah didn't say anything. And they shot Isaiah. And then they shot my friend Matt also.
And then you played dead, Craig.
Yeah, I just ended up laying on the floor. I was praying to God to give me courage and to keep protection over us, and he told me to get out of there. God told me to get out of there.
Meanwhile, scores of people claimed Dylan and Eric had been bullied. In the months of coverage that followed, bullying in schools was put into a national spotlight. The media incorrectly said the boys were in the group of quirky outcasts called the Trenchcoat Mafia. And then several observers pointed out that the pair had lots of friends and healthy social lives, with Eric Harris even being a member of the soccer team. Wrote Eric in one of his journal entries, "It's my fault. Not my parents, not my brothers, not my friends, not my favorite bands, not computer games, not the media. It is mine. God damn it, do not blame anyone else besides me and Dylan for this. Don't blame my family. They had no clue, and there's nothing they could have done. They brought me up just fucking fine. Don't blame the school. The administration is doing a fine job." The victims and their families didn't agree, and 30 families would receive a total $2.5 million from the families of Harris, Klebold, Main, and Duran. Isaiah Shoels' family accepted a separate $350,000 settlement in a suit in which they had sought $250 million from the four families for failing to supervise their children. Dylan and Eric's interest in video games renewed hostility towards the medium. Then rumor got out that the boys and the Trenchcoat Mafia were huge Marilyn Manson fans and goths, which wasn't true. The goth subculture received extensive press in the wake of the attack.
On beauty in graveyards and beauty in like dark dress and dark movies and dark books.
They like to live on the fringe of society, wearing dark makeup and clothes, listening to alternative music like Marilyn Manson. They are known as gothics or goths, but in the wake of the massacre in Columbine High, this underground youth movement is being viewed as something much more than just a fashion statement. Several school districts in the Denver area are banning students from wearing goth-like trench coats, and kids told us that police are rounding up some gothic teens. This young man's friend was brought in for questioning.
One of my friends gets arrested off the street for wearing a black trench coat, walking down the street for doing nothing wrong.
So far, there is no proof the two suspects in the Columbine High massacre, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, considered themselves gothics. But there are striking similarities. The suspects were reportedly into the music of goth rocker Marilyn Manson, who has described himself as a satanic priest and an outsider.
Said Alabama Senator Jeff Sessions, "They are able to hook into the internet and play video games that are extraordinarily violent. Games that cause people to be killed and the players to die themselves. They're able to get into the internet chat rooms, and if there are no nuts or people of the same mentality in their hometown, hook up with people around the country. They are able to rent from the video store, not just go down and see Natural Born Killers or the Basketball Diaries, but they are able to bring it home and watch it repeatedly. In music, there is Marilyn Manson, an individual who chooses the name of a mass murderer as part of his name. The lyrics of his music are consistent with his choice of name." Marilyn Manson, a band made up of multiple people and the lead singer of the same name, were peaking in popularity in the late 90s, especially after their 1998 song, The Dope Show. To his credit, Marilyn Manson cloaked the political hypocrisy in a 1999 Rolling Stone op-ed. He wrote, "Even if they were fans, that gives them no excuse, nor does it mean that music is to blame. Did we look for James Huberty's inspiration when he gunned down people at McDonald's? What did Timothy McVeigh like to watch? What about David Koresh, Jim Jones? Do you think entertainment inspired Kip Kinkle? Or should we blame the fact that his father bought him the guns he used in the Springfield, Oregon murders? Isn't killing just killing, regardless of if it's in Vietnam or Jonesboro, Arkansas?" That last one was a reference to the 1998 West Side Middle School shooting, in which two boys named Mitchell Johnson and Andrew Golden, ages 13 and 11, murdered 5 people, 4 students and a teacher, before being arrested. They got out at the age of 21. Both Columbine and Jonesboro and Kip Kinkle, who we discuss in I Love the 90s True Crime, strengthened calls for gun reform, along with several incidents we discuss in episode 6 of this series. But even survivors of Columbine and people who lived in similar regions of low-populated areas surrounded by wilderness and steeped in gun culture were divided on gun reform. Answered one Columbine survivor when asked how many guns his family kept in the home. How many? Probably 6 or 7. I could run around and start shooting people easily, but it's morals. You just know right from wrong. My parents have trained me with guns. The number of homicides committed by youth in America dropped by 68% between 1993 and 1999, and youth crime was at its lowest in 25 years. But the terrorism of 2 white suburban teenagers signaled that all wasn't well, leaving an irreversible mark on American culture. They had shown endless red flags, but due to their white privilege and the permissive gun culture of Colorado, nothing was done. Despite loving households, good grades, therapy, good schooling, and every other manner of middle-class life, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold were dangerous ticking time bombs. As a result of the Columbine massacre, there was a new examination of the nihilism of the white male at the end of history, exhibited in films like Fight Club, which was allegedly delayed to a fall release after the massacre. Wrote film crit Hulk, "Suddenly, we had a generation of mostly young white boys who felt soft and coddled, so what they craved became the hardships sold to them by movies." Mart, which faced heavy criticism, stopped selling gun ammo in 2001. And school safety drills also incorporated shooting scenarios.
4 months passed before Columbine students returned to their school. They turned it into a celebration. Ireland was there.
When Columbine High reopened in fall 1999 after undergoing millions in renovations, there were changes, including a new library. Recalled Columbine principal Frank DeAngelis, "We could not serve Chinese food because that was the meal the kids were eating when the shooting started. Teachers had to change the curriculum. They couldn't show a World War II movie because of the sound of gunfire. Doors slammed, kids would have meltdowns." Columbine forced many people to reckon with the realities of teenage life in an attempt to make sense of what had happened.